is Cora. I'm 32 years old and I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Columbus, Ohio. It has a small balcony where I keep a pot of rosemary and one of basil, and on clear evenings I sit out there with a glass of iced tea and listen to the city settle into night. It took me a long time to earn that quiet, longer than it should have. The moment everything changed wasn't dramatic. It didn't happen during a blowout fight or a slammed door. It happened on a Sunday afternoon in my parents' living room, with the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead and the smell of pot roast coming from the kitchen. My sister was sitting on the couch in a white dress, still glowing from her wedding the day before. My father was in his recliner. My mother was bringing out sweet tea on a tray, and then my father handed me a piece of paper folded into thirds. I opened it. It was a number. $15,000. With a handwritten note underneath that said, "We're a little stretched after the wedding. You've always been the responsible one. We know you have savings." I looked at my sister. She looked at the carpet. I looked at my father. He was already reaching for the remote. That was the moment I understood, completely and finally, exactly what I was to my family. I was the safety net. I was the backup plan. I was the one who had always been fine, so they never had to worry about me. And because they never worried about me, they assumed I had reserves, financial, emotional, otherwise, that they were entitled to draw from whenever they needed. I folded the paper back into thirds. I put it in my pocket. I said I would think about it. I didn't think about it. I already knew. But before I tell you what I did, let me go back, because this didn't start with a wedding or a number on a piece of paper. It started decades earlier, in a house where I learned very quickly how things worked. My sister is 3 years older than me. Her name is Bryn. Growing up, Bryn was the one my parents talked about at the dinner table. Bryn's dance recital, Bryn's audition, Bryn's friends, Bryn's heartbreaks, Bryn's plans. I don't say that with bitterness now. I've had years to sort through the feelings and understand what they actually were. But as a kid, I just knew the shape of it. I knew that when Brennan came home crying, the whole house rearranged itself around her. When I came home crying, my mother would say, "You're so strong, Cora. You always figure it out." Being called strong when you're 9 years old and scared is a very specific kind of loneliness. There was one afternoon I still think about. I was 12. I had tried out for the travel soccer team and I made it. It was a big deal to me. I had practiced all summer in the backyard, shooting against the wooden fence until the slats had scuff marks all the way up. I came home with the envelope and I was practically vibrating. I handed it to my mom. She opened it, read it, smiled, and said, "That's great, honey." Then she went back to the phone. She was in the middle of a conversation about Brennan's college application timeline. I put the envelope on the kitchen counter and went up to my room. Nobody mentioned it at dinner. The next week, my parents pulled me aside and said they weren't sure they could afford the travel fees. But Bren was applying to fine arts programs that had their own application costs, and those had to come first. Could I maybe do the regular rec league instead? I said sure. I always said sure. What I learned, over and over, in small and large ways, was that my needs were negotiable. Bryn's needs were fixed. If there was a conflict between what I needed and what she needed, the answer was always the same. I adjusted. I gave way. And I got very good at not needing things at all. By the time I was in high school, I had developed a whole system. I didn't ask for things unless I was certain they'd say yes. I paid for my own school supplies with babysitting money. I figured out my own rides. I didn't ask to be driven to the library at night. I biked. I didn't tell them when I was struggling in pre-calc because I didn't want to be a bother. I got a tutor at school and stayed after hours. I fixed it myself. I always fixed it myself. I graduated with honors and a full academic scholarship to Ohio State. When I told my parents, my dad said, "See, we knew you'd be fine." My mother cried a little, but she was distracted because Bryn was going through a breakup that week and needed a lot of phone time. I was fine. I was always fine. I moved out for college and I didn't move back. I got an internship the summer after junior year that turned into a job offer before I even graduated. By 23, I was an analyst at a financial services firm downtown. By 26, I had my own apartment and a car I'd bought used but had fully paid off. By 29, I had a retirement account with actual contributions in it, an emergency fund, and a savings account that I had been disciplining myself to build for exactly the kind of life I wanted, one where I wouldn't have to depend on anyone. I was careful with money the way people are careful when they've watched what happens when you're not. My parents weren't bad with money, but they were loose. They spent what they had. There was no savings cushion. When the water heater broke, it went on a credit card. When Bryn needed her car repaired, they put it on a credit card. When Bryn went through a hard year after a failed engagement, my parents sent her money every month for almost 2 years so she could keep her apartment. I know this because my mother mentioned it casually once, in passing, and I said, "How much?" And she said, "Oh, not much, just a few hundred here and there." She was really struggling. She said it like it was nothing. Like of course they did that. Like it was just what you do when your child needs you. Nobody sent me money when I was struggling, but I didn't say that. I hadn't asked. Bryn met her husband 3 years ago. His name is Wade. He's fine. He's perfectly nice. He's perfectly nice. He works in sales, likes college football, has a laugh that fills a room. They dated for about 18 months before he proposed, which was fast. But Bryn is someone who makes decisions quickly and loudly, and everyone in her orbit catches up when they can. The engagement was announced at a family dinner that I drove 2 hours to attend. There was champagne. There were tears. My mother was visibly more excited than I had ever seen her about anything in my adult life. The wedding planning started immediately. I was named maid of honor. I said yes without hesitation because I love my sister. I do. Whatever complicated feelings live in my chest about our childhood, I genuinely love her. She's funny and dramatic, and she feels everything loudly, and there is a part of me that has always admired that. Because I feel everything quietly and alone. Being maid of honor meant organizing the bachelorette weekend in Nashville. That was 4 days, a rented house, 13 women, and a lot of itinerary management. I planned every meal, every activity, every reservation. I built a shared spreadsheet so everyone could Venmo their share. I stayed up until midnight 3 nights running getting the last details sorted. When it was over, Bryn texted me and said, "You're literally the best. I don't know what I would do without you." I saved that text. I looked at it a few times in the months that followed. I also helped my mother source the centerpieces because Bryn had gotten overwhelmed. I drove to 4 different wholesale florists across 2 weekends. I sat in on the venue calls when Bryn said she needed a second set of ears. I wrote the seating chart 3 different times as the guest list shifted. I didn't ask for anything in return. That's not why I did it. I did it because she's my sister. But I was watching. I couldn't help watching. The wedding was going to cost, by my rough estimate based on what I was seeing, somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000. My parents were contributing a significant chunk. They had told Bryn that they would cover the venue and catering. Everything else was Bryn and Wade's responsibility, but my parents kept quietly absorbing overruns. The flowers went over budget. My parents covered it. The photographer upgraded his package. My parents covered the difference. The rehearsal dinner venue changed last minute to somewhere nicer. My parents covered it. I didn't say anything. It wasn't my wedding. It wasn't my money. The wedding was on a Saturday in May. It was genuinely beautiful. The venue was an old estate outside of Cincinnati. White fences and rolling grass and the kind of golden late afternoon light that makes everything look like a memory already. Bryn was radiant. Wade cried when she walked down the aisle. I stood next to her in a pale blue dress and held her bouquet and felt my heart do something complicated, which is the only way I know how to describe it. Proud and sad and glad, and something older underneath all of that. Something I didn't have a name for yet. The reception was wonderful. I gave a speech. I meant every word of it. I drove home Sunday morning. I was at my parents' house the following Sunday for dinner. Just a regular Sunday, nothing special. My mom had made pot roast and there were biscuits. The ceiling fan was turning. The TV was off for once, which I noticed and thought was slightly unusual. After dinner, while I was helping clear the plates, My father asked me to come sit down in the living room for a minute. He had a folder on the coffee table. He opened it. He slid a piece of paper across to me. It had a number at the top, $15,000. Below that, my parents' names and a handwritten line. We've given so much toward the wedding. We'd like to borrow this to stabilize things. You've always been sensible, Cora. We know you have savings. I read it twice. I looked up at my mother. She was looking at her hands. I looked at my father. He was watching me with an expression I can only describe as expectant. Not ashamed. Not apologetic. Expectant. Like he was waiting for me to nod and get out my checkbook. What happened to your savings? I asked. He explained, carefully, that the wedding had cost more than anticipated. They had overextended a little. It wasn't a crisis, just a gap. They'd pay me back. They just needed a bridge. I looked at the piece of paper again. I thought about the 4 florist visits, the seating charts, the Nashville spreadsheet, the 2-hour drives, the speech I'd memorized and rewritten 4 times. I thought about the rec league, the biking to the library, the tutor I'd found myself, the scholarship I'd earned because I had known since I was 12 years old that no one was going to hand me anything. I thought about Bryn in her white dress on the couch that morning, still in the glow of the night before, and how my father had handed this paper to me and not to her. I thought about the word stabilize. I said, I need some time to think about this. My father said, of course, but we'd need an answer soon. The credit card statement closes Thursday. I drove home. The 2 hours felt like 10 minutes because I wasn't really in the car. I was in my head, in every room of my childhood, understanding things I had always half known but never let myself see clearly. They knew I had savings because I had told them, once, proudly, that I'd hit a financial milestone I'd been working toward. I had shared that as good news, the way you share good news with your family. And they had filed it away, not as pride in me, as a resource. I sat in my apartment that night for a long time. I didn't turn on the TV. I just sat with it. I didn't feel angry at first. I felt something more like clarity, like a window being cleaned from the inside, like I was finally seeing without the smear. I didn't call them Monday. I didn't call them Tuesday. On Wednesday morning, my mother texted, just checking in, sweetheart. Have you had a chance to think? I had. I'd done almost nothing else. I thought about what would happen if I said yes. I would write the check. It would be cashed. They would be stabilized, as my father put it. There would probably be no formal repayment plan, or there would be one that quietly faded. I would have spent years building a safety net, and they would pull from it like it was community property. And the next time there was a gap, because there would be a next time, they would know I had said yes once. I thought about what I actually wanted, not what I should want, not what a good daughter would do, what I, Cora, actually wanted for my life. And I realized I wanted to be seen, not as a resource, not as the responsible one, not as the backup plan. I wanted my savings to belong to my future, not to be the thing my family quietly depended on without ever asking what I needed. I wrote a reply to my mother. I drafted it 6 times. The final version was 11 sentences. I said I love them. I said I couldn't make the loan. I said I had my own financial commitments and goals that required those funds. I said I was sorry if the wedding costs had stretched things, but I needed to make this decision based on my own stability. I said I hoped they understood. I sent it. 10 minutes later, my father called. I let it ring. He called 3 more times that afternoon. My mother called twice. My sister called once, which surprised me because it meant they had already talked to Bryn about it, which meant they had discussed my money with her before they discussed it with me, and something about that landed hard. I let them all ring. That evening, I sent a second message, this time to all 3 of them in a group text. I said, I've made my decision and it isn't going to change. I'm happy to talk about anything else, but I'm not able to discuss the loan further. I love you all. Then I put my phone face down on the counter and made dinner. Pasta with olive oil and garlic and a lot of parmesan. I sat at my own table in my own apartment and ate my own food and tried to identify what I was feeling. It wasn't relief, not yet. It was more like vertigo, like I had stepped off a ledge I hadn't realized I'd been standing on my whole life. The next few days were loud, in the way that silence from your family is loud. My mother didn't text her usual daily check-ins. My father didn't send me the news articles he normally forwarded. Bryn went quiet. Then on Friday evening, my sister called from a number I didn't recognize. I picked up. "It's me," she said. "Don't hang up." I didn't hang up. "They're really upset," she said. "Mom cried yesterday." "I'm sorry she's upset," I said. "Cora, they're not going to ask you again, but I think you should just." "Bryn," my voice was calm. I surprised myself with how calm it was. "They spent money they didn't have on your wedding. That's not my problem to fix." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a harsh way to put it," she said. "Maybe," I said, "but it's accurate." There was a longer silence. Then she said quietly, "I didn't know they were going to ask you." I believed her, and I believed that she was genuinely uncomfortable. Bryn is not cruel. She's just always been the center of gravity in our family, and she's never had to notice what that costs everyone else because no one ever made it visible. "I know you didn't," I said. "This isn't about you and me." "Then what is it about?" I thought about how to answer that honestly without turning it into something she'd have to defend herself against. "It's about the fact that I have been the responsible one my entire life, and no one ever asked if I was okay with that. It was just decided, and now I'm saying I'm not doing it anymore." She didn't have a quick response to that. That was new. We talked for another 20 minutes. It wasn't a resolution. It was more like the beginning of a real conversation, the first one we'd ever had where I wasn't managing her feelings, and she wasn't the one being managed. When we hung up, I felt something loosen in my chest. The weeks that followed were strange. My parents and I were technically in contact, but at a distance I'd never maintained before. My mother sent polite texts. My father sent a terse message saying he respected my decision, which was the least warm version of those words I had ever encountered. I responded to both with equal politeness. I went to a therapist for the first time in my life. I had been meaning to go for years. I'd always been fine, so I'd kept putting it off. I found someone who specialized in family systems and adult children, and I went every Thursday at 6 o'clock. In our second session, she asked me what I was most afraid of, and I said that I've made the wrong choice and they actually needed me and I let them down. She asked, "And what would it mean if that were true?" I thought for a long time. Then I said that I'm selfish. "And is that how you see yourself?" I had spent 32 years being the opposite of selfish, so visibly and consistently that my family had come to depend on it as a structural feature of their lives. The idea that setting one boundary could erase all of that was almost funny. "No," I said, "I guess not." She smiled. "Keep going." I did. At work, without the low hum of family anxiety that I'd been carrying around like a second phone, I noticed I had more energy. I volunteered to lead a client project that had intimidated me before. I had more patience in meetings. I slept better. Little things. But they added up. 3 months after the Sunday of the piece of paper, I got a promotion and a raise significant enough that I went home and sat quietly for a full minute after reading the offer letter. I had worked for it, but I had also, for the first time, worked without a part of my brain reserved for whatever the next family thing was going to be. I didn't call my parents to share the news first. I called my best friend. We went out for dinner and split a bottle of wine, and she said, "You should be incredibly proud of yourself." I let myself feel that without deflecting it. That was new too. My father showed up at my apartment about 2 months after the loan conversation. I didn't know he was coming. It was a Tuesday evening, just starting to rain, and I heard a knock at my door that I recognized immediately as his knock, even though he'd never knocked on this door before. There's a way people's knocking carries their personality. My father knocks like he expects the door to open before he finishes. I looked through the peephole. He was standing in the hallway in his jacket, damp from the rain, holding his cap in his hand. I opened the door. He looked at the apartment the same way people look at things that don't match what they expected. It was clean. It had real furniture now. There was art on the walls I'd picked out myself, a print from a Columbus artist I'd found at a street fair. He took it in without commenting. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped back. I didn't tell him to sit. He sat anyway on the couch and looked at his hands for a long moment. "Your mother doesn't know I'm here," he said. "Okay," I said. "I've been thinking about what you said. That we never asked if you were okay with things. That it was just decided." I waited. "I don't know that I have a good answer for that," he said. "I think you never asked for anything, so we thought you were fine." "I know," I said. "I know that's what you thought. I'm not saying it's an excuse. I know that too." He looked up at me. His face was older than I usually let myself notice. The skin under his eyes had gone soft. His hair was fully gray. "We should have done better by you," he said. "I should have." It wasn't the speech I had imagined in my head, in the versions where I finally got the apology I'd wanted. It wasn't dramatic. It was small and quiet and a little awkward, and it didn't cover everything or fix everything. But it was real. I could tell by the way he was looking at the floor after he said it, he wasn't performing. He was just an older man who had been sitting with something uncomfortable and had finally come to say it out loud. "Thank you," I said. "That means something to me." We sat together for a while. He had a glass of water. I didn't offer anything warmer, not because I wanted to punish him, but because I wasn't there yet. It wasn't a full reconciliation. It was one true moment inside a complicated history. When he left, he paused at the door. "You've built something good here," he said. "I have," I agreed. After the door closed, I stood in the middle of my apartment and breathed. It's been about 18 months now. My relationship with my family exists on terms that I set, which is a sentence I couldn't have said before, and which still feels strange and right at the same time. I see them 4 or 5 times a year. I don't drive out for every holiday, only the ones that feel genuine rather than obligatory. I call my mother once a week. My father and I text occasionally, still a little careful with each other, still rebuilding something neither of us has a word for yet. Bryn and I are actually closer than we've ever been, not because the conversation on the phone fixed everything, but because it cracked something open between us, and we've been slowly, carefully walking through the opening. She asked me last fall if I wanted to get dinner. Just the two of us, no occasion. We went to an Italian place and split a carafe of red wine, and she asked me, unprompted, what my life was actually like. Not how work was going or whether I was seeing anyone. What my life was actually like. I told her, more than I ever had. She listened. And then she said, "I think I missed a lot of things that were happening for you." She said it plainly, without a lot of performance around it. I appreciated that. "You did," I said. "But we can try differently from here." We paid our own checks. On the way out, she linked her arm through mine and we walked to our cars in the cold, and I thought, this is what it might have been like if we'd been raised to actually see each other. At home that night, I opened the drawer in my nightstand where I keep things that matter. There's a photo of me at a trail run I finished last spring. There's a card from my therapist when we ended our work together. And there's the piece of paper my father slid across the coffee table on that Sunday afternoon. $15,000. The number that changed everything. I keep it because it's the most honest thing my family ever said to me, even if they didn't mean it that way. For 30 years, they had treated me as the capable one, the fine one, the one who didn't require investment. And then they handed me a number and made that belief explicit, in ink, in my father's handwriting, on a Sunday afternoon with pot roast on the stove. They needed money. They came to me. Not to Bryn, who had just had the $50,000 wedding. To me. Because I was responsible. That piece of paper was the clearest mirror I had ever been handed. I said no to the loan. I said yes to myself. That's the whole story. If you're someone who's always been the capable one, the fine one, the one everyone leans on because you never seem to need anything, I want you to hear this. Being capable is not the same as being okay. Handling everything alone is not strength. It is what happens when you learn very early that your needs are negotiable and other people's are not. You adapt. You get very good at not asking. And eventually, the people around you stop offering because you've never seemed to need it and they've gotten comfortable with that. But you are allowed to need things. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to keep what you built. Saying no to the loan was the first time in my life I treated my own future as non-negotiable. It was the hardest thing I've done, and it was the beginning of everything that came after. I used to think that being reliable was a virtue, and it is, but only when it's a choice, not a condition that other people assign to you before you're old enough to refuse it. What happened to me didn't happen because my parents were monsters. They weren't. My father drove me to soccer tryouts when I was 9. My mother packed my lunch every day through middle school. They loved me in the ways they knew how. But somewhere along the way, they made a quiet decision about who I was in the family structure, and they never revisited it. I was the capable one, the one who figured things out, the one who didn't need anything. And because that story was easier than the truth, they held on to it for 30 years. The truth is that I needed things constantly. I needed someone to come to my games. I needed someone to notice when I was struggling. I needed someone to think about my future the way they thought about my sisters. I just stopped asking early enough that they forgot I ever had needs at all. The piece of paper my father slid across that coffee table, $15,000, his handwriting, his absolute expectation that I would say yes, that was the most clarifying thing my family ever did. It wasn't cruelty. It was honesty, the accidental kind. It told me exactly what my decades of competence had communicated to them, that I was a resource, not a person they needed to worry about. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of this over the last year and a half, is that consequences are patient, not in any mystical sense, just in the plain, observable way that how you treat people eventually shapes what you have with them. My parents treated Bryn as someone whose comfort mattered, and so she became someone who expected comfort. They treated me as someone who would manage, and so I managed, until managing stopped being sustainable. The consequence of all those years wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It just showed up one Sunday afternoon in a folded piece of paper. And my consequence for saying no, the thing I feared most, being seen as selfish, being cut off, losing the family entirely, didn't happen either. What happened was harder and slower and more real. My father came to my door in the rain and said, without a speech or a performance, that he should have done better. My sister asked me what my life was actually like. Things didn't break. They shifted. Not all the way, not perfectly, but in directions I had stopped believing were possible. I think about Cora at 12 years old, putting the soccer envelope on the kitchen counter. I think about her biking to the library in the dark. I think about her changing a tire in the rain, alone, not telling anyone because she had already learned that her emergencies weren't emergencies to the people who should have cared. I think about what she needed someone to say to her, and I try to say it now to anyone who finds themselves in the same quiet position. You are not required to be the one who manages. You are not required to fund other people's choices with the savings you built in the margins of a life nobody helped you with. Being capable is something you earned. It belongs to you. The fact that you can handle something alone does not mean you should, and the moment you stop, the moment you finally hold the line, is not a betrayal of the people you love. It is the first honest thing you've said to them in years.